Power in Rome was not only proclaimed in marble forums or battlefield triumphs, it was enforced in whispers, in chains, in the trembling hands of the conquered. As the empire expanded, so too did its appetite for domination, reaching into every corner of the known world to seize not just land, but lives. Among the most vulnerable were young girls, taken, sold, and erased beneath the grandeur of empire. Their suffering was not a side note in Rome's history, it was the cost of its civilization. Girls seized in Roman conquests. Throughout the expansion of the Roman Republic and later the Empire, the seizure of enemy populations was not a side effect of conquest. It was the objective. Provinces from Gaul to Asia Minor, from Britannia to Judea, witnessed the same grim ritual. Roman legions entering towns and villages, taking plunder and rounding up survivors. Among the most vulnerable were young girls, often between the ages of 10 and 15, whose lives changed irrevocably in a single day. Known as praeda or booty, these girls were legally classified as property the moment they were captured. The Roman military command permitted and at times encouraged the enslavement of enemy civilians. After a town's defeat, officers would separate the captives by age and sex. Young girls, seen as the most profitable and pliable, were highly prized. They were often stripped of their native clothes, inspected for health and physical attributes, and branded with marks denoting ownership or origin. The brutality of this process is recorded in grim detail in Roman sources. Plutarch, in his Life of Lucullus, recounts how during the campaigns in Pontus, captives were so numerous that slave prices plummeted. Tacitus notes that after the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 CE, many Jewish girls were paraded in chains during the triumph of General Titus, only to be sold into lifelong servitude. The trauma these girls endured was immediate and lasting. Torn from their families, many of whom had been killed or enslaved themselves, they faced not just the loss of home and kin, but the erasure of identity. Roman law did not recognize the personhood of a slave. These children had no legal protection, no recourse, no future outside of what their owners dictated. Their names were often Latinized or replaced altogether, their native languages suppressed, and their religious customs forbidden. Some were marched for weeks across provinces to reach Italy. Others were held in holding camps before being auctioned. All were bound for a market that viewed them as commodities, young bodies with the potential to serve, entertain, or bear children. And this was only the beginning. Auctioning girls at the Roman slave market. Imagine the forum crowded not for debate or celebration, but for commerce in flesh, where the laughter of merchants masked the cries of the unwilling. This was the Roman slave market, and for countless young girls, it marked the first day of their life in bondage. Known as Venalicia, these slave markets were scattered throughout the Roman world, with the most infamous located in the heart of Rome near the Forum Boarium. Here, girls seized in conquests or born into slavery were sold like livestock. Buyers arrived early, scanning rows of children, many barely in adolescence. Age, physical health, and perceived obedience determined value. Youth, especially, was a premium trait for beauty, endurance, and the potential for years of service or childbirth. Upon arrival at market, the girls were often placed on a raised platform, cataster, to be examined publicly. Roman law even permitted sellers to strip the enslaved to verify their condition. Cicero once wrote of slaves being placed on the stand and displayed like merchandise. For girls, this meant exposure to invasive scrutiny by prospective buyers who checked teeth, skin, and posture, all while barking questions the girls likely could not understand. Many wore placards around their necks, tituli, detailing their origin, age, and any defects such as language barriers, disobedience, or illness. These signs rarely reflected the truth. Sellers had a vested interest in concealing trauma or past rebellion. And since most girls were sold young, many had no way of even telling their own stories, if they remembered them at all. While the Roman economy thrived on slavery, the market for young female slaves was distinct. They were not merely purchased for labor. In wealthy households, they were destined for roles as maids, wet nurses, or personal attendants, jobs that often blurred into servitude of the most intimate kind. Behind every sale was the total loss of autonomy. Once purchased, a girl belonged to her dominus, her master, by law, by tradition, and by force. The transaction sealed her fate with ink and coin. Some were sold multiple times in their lives, treated as disposable assets, each sale a further erasure of origin and identity. There was no ceremony, no farewell, only a sharp command, the weight of a chain, and the indifferent stare of a new owner. The Roman slave market did not just trade in bodies. It consumed lives, silenced voices, and institutionalized a system in which even childhood offered no refuge from exploitation. In these markets, the grandeur of Roman civilization was built not on justice, but on the commodification of the innocent. Domestic servitude in elite households. Behind the grand marble columns and lavish courtyards of Rome's elite villas, a quieter story unfolded, one of relentless obedience, unending labor, and invisible suffering. For many young female slaves, their new life after auction began within these opulent households, not as guests, but as possessions. Known in Latin as ancillae, these girls were assigned to domestic service, roles that ranged from menial tasks to deeply personal duties. The moment they crossed the threshold of a Roman domus, their existence became structured entirely around the whims of the household. Every waking hour was governed by commands: clean the atrium, tend the fires, fetch water, serve food, comb the mistress's hair, attend to the children. Elite Roman households were complex institutions. The paterfamilias, or male head of the family, wielded absolute authority. Even among slaves, hierarchies existed. Young girls were often placed at the bottom, considered too inexperienced to manage or too valuable for anything but close personal service. In many cases, they were made to serve the mistress of the house, aiding in her toilette, assisting with her wardrobe, or caring for her children. But loyalty brought no reward. Affection was rare. One misstep could lead to punishment or reassignment. These girls were not permitted privacy. They slept in corners of kitchens, storerooms, or at the foot of their mistress's bed. They ate only after their masters had dined, and only what was left. Some were forced to accompany their owners even outside the home, to the baths, to temples, or to social gatherings, always silent, always alert, always servile. Education, if provided at all, was limited to practical skills. A select few were trained in music, embroidery, or medicine, but only if their owners saw profit in it. Most were taught just enough Latin to understand orders. Native languages, native customs, and family names were suppressed. These girls were not meant to remember who they had been. Even kindness from a master or mistress was strategic, not compassionate. A slightly gentler tone or a meager gift could be used to cultivate obedience. But make no mistake, these small acts never challenged the fundamental truth, that the girl was property without legal rights or social identity. Her worth existed only through her service. This servitude was not temporary. Unless sold, punished, or freed, she remained bound to the household indefinitely. And unlike adult male slaves, who might be assigned field labor or construction, young female slaves faced a unique vulnerability. They were constantly under watch, subject to exploitation that extended beyond work. Behind Rome's grand facades, these girls polished silver that would never be theirs and raised children they did not birth. Their labor made the elegance of Roman life possible, while their own lives disappeared day by day into quiet, unrecorded toil. Punishments for disobedient slave girls. In the glittering world of Roman luxury, Disobedience from a slave, especially a young girl, was met not with understanding, but with cruelty sanctioned by law. The Roman household or familia functioned as a microcosm of the empire itself, strict, hierarchical and merciless toward those who defied authority. For enslaved girls, whose slightest misstep could be construed as defiance, punishment was both a tool of control and a daily threat. The paterfamilias, known as the absolute head of the family, held the ancient right of vitae necisque potestas, the power of life and death over his dependents, including slaves. This authority was rarely challenged, and Roman law offered no protection to those enslaved. The historian Seneca once noted in his De Beneficis that we abuse our slaves as though they were not men, capturing the brutal normalcy of punishment within elite households. A young slave girl could be punished for any number of offenses: breaking a dish, failing to rise quickly, speaking out of turn, or showing hesitation in her duties. The lash was the most common tool of correction, its use so normalized that Roman writers mentioned it casually. Pliny the Younger described in a letter how some masters kept overseers armed with whips stationed throughout their estates to maintain discipline. For girls, these punishments often occurred in private spaces, kitchens, storerooms, or secluded courtyards, where humiliation compounded pain. Public punishment served a different purpose. To make an example, enslaved girls might be chained in visible areas of the house or forced to perform exhausting labor as a warning to others. The intent was psychological domination, to remind every enslaved person that resistance was futile. Some masters, fearing theft or escape, branded their slaves on the forehead or shoulders with the letters FUG, marking them forever as runaways. The Roman legal code, the Lex Alia Sentia, even allowed for the execution of slaves accused of conspiracy or striking their masters. Though young girls were rarely executed, they lived in constant proximity to that threat. Punishment was not merely discipline, it was a system designed to break the will. Through fear, Rome maintained its vast machinery of servitude, and for the girls within it, silence became the only safe rebellion. Manumission and the rare path to freedom. For most young female slaves in ancient Rome, the idea of freedom was little more than a distant echo. But for a fortunate few, the path to manumission, legal release from slavery, offered a sliver of hope amid lives otherwise bound by servitude. Manumission, from the Latin manus, hand, and mittere, to send forth, was the formal act of setting a slave free. It could occur through various means: by declaration before a magistrate, by inclusion in a master's will, or even by simple statement in front of witnesses. But these legal pathways were rarely accessible to enslaved girls who had no status, no savings,